What's going on? Nick Tello here. Today I'm going to break down the mix of my song Chaos into Cash. So this song is, I don't know what you call it, pop punk with trap drums, trap pop with 808's. I have no idea, but it's a lot of fun in terms of, the arrangement. There was a lot of things I had to do to get the, vocals to fit in the mix and to get the mix to be, because the arrangement itself is very busy and the vocal layers are very busy. And I feel like at this point, I'm like the black belt of like mixing busy mixes because there's so many things you have to do. So I'll just play the song just so you can hear it and then I'll dive in.
Getting gas too fast with no brakes. Throw her in the trash and hatch the next play. Corporate craze, get the fuck away. More to life than the lunch you paid. Sworn into a mission built on dumb luck. No one's due to listen till you come up. Yeah, turn the chaos into cash. Throw right hooks till the episode back. I'm never not exhausted, but I won't waste my time. Yeah, turn the chaos into cash. Bury our losses with the other set backside. I'm nervous, but I'm in too deep to resign. I'm nervous.
Yeah, so you get the idea. It's very busy, very high energy, and it was a lot of fun to mix. So let's start with what I think most people want to see, which is the vocal chain. So let me just solo this part, and I like to mix one vocal at a time in terms of like I built a vocal chain, mix one vocal into that vocal chain as opposed to, because obviously there are a lot of vocals happening here. So I mix one vocal, build the vocal chain around that vocal, and then sometimes I'll bust multiple vocals into a vocal chain, which I'll get into a little bit later. But so check it out. So first thing, very obvious, auto-tune. So let me just actually do this. So I'm gonna bypass everything. This vocal chain is so long. Oh my God. Yeah, so here's what the vocals sound like by themselves. I recommend mixing your vocals probably like 5 decibels louder than they are in the mix, and then building your vocal chain with the mix in the background, just because you'll make better decisions in terms of how they interact with the mix overall. But here, just for this video, I'm just gonna solo it just so you can hear step by step how I built the vocal chain. So here's with nothing on it.
Yeah, paid the fees, gave the keys, shut it all down and arrange a speech.
Okay, so yeah, first thing I do is I throw auto-tune on, and I went over this in my production video, but
here's to getting gas too fast with no brakes. Throw her in the trash and hatch the next play. Corporate craze, get the fuck away.
yeah, if it's at 0, it's a little too much.
You know what
I mean? It's way too, like, you get that sound. So yeah, so I rock with 5 on this. And then, okay, so first thing in the vocal chain, let me just break it down for you. So yeah, first thing in the vocal chain is a de-esser, always de-esser.
Yeah, paid the fees.
Consider it part of the cleanup. So yeah, what I do is I basically just kind of try to isolate where the S is happening.
No breaks. Throw her in the trash and hatch.
I basically just like sweep around and try to find where the S is actually happening. A lot of times it is 11K, so that's usually what I rock with. Next is the first stage of EQ. Literally just like cutting everything below like 100. You don't need anything for vocals. Lowering some of the mud. Just keep in mind, like I did record this through an Avalon with the EQ settings, so like there are some things about this that are, like I added some analog EQ and some, like I recorded through a distressor, so it is compressing it on the way in. So this vocal is not completely raw. So yeah, a lot of these frequencies are kind of just being lowered just a little bit because I did do some work prior to actually like, starting this mix through, EQing it in the analog domain. That's like a boxy frequency. That's like a kind of more boxy, also telephonic frequency. And my vocal has a lot of just this annoying telephonic frequency range from like 2K to like 3.5K. So I'm just lowering that just a little bit. Yeah, all that's annoying. All right, so next thing I do, my first stage of compression, I usually hit it like kind of like 5 to 7 max on here. Then what I found a great starting place for like any 76 style is, the fast attack at 6 and set 6 for the release. So you kind of want a fast release because listen with a slow release.
Here's to getting gas too fast with
and then listen with a fast release. It's a little more forward, you know what I mean? So because the release is releasing on the syllables more quickly, so as a result the whole syllable as a whole gets sort of juiced forward. So that's what the trick is the fast release. So then I put a 2A on here. Normally I don't do this, but the 2A does work well on my voice. What I don't like about the 2A is it has like fixed attack and release settings, so you can't really manipulate it the same way you would something else. But in this case, it worked. I'm only doing a little bit though here.
Pay paid. Sworn into a mission built
I
on
usually
dumb
only
luck.
hit like a
No one's gonna
2A,
listen till
like,
you come
you know,
down.
2 decibels
Paid the
max.
fees, gave
Kind
the
of just
keys,
smoothing out,
shut her
you know,
all down
rounding
and
off the
arrange a
transients just a
speech.
little bit.
Here's to getting gas
Then
too
one of the
fast
main
with
things
no
I do,
brakes. Throw her in the trash and
compress
hash
this
the
kind of
next
like mid-rangey frequency range. Because, yeah, a lot of times, like, especially when you add compression, the frequency in the mid-range will get juiced up. So I kind of just, like, you know, smooth it out with this compressor that just compresses the frequencies on here.
Go away, more to life than the lunch you paid. Sworn into a mission built
And then
on dumb
Soothe
luck.
is basically
No
just
one's
like,
gonna listen till you come down.
Soothe is a
Paid
great
the
plugin. I usually try not to like gas it up too much because it is an investment. It's like $200, but it is worth it for people that like me who like have a lot of like bitey like 3K in their voice, and it just takes a lot of the sort of like tedious dynamic EQing out of the picture. Because when you see what it's doing, it's basically just taking this frequency range and suppressing the annoying bitey frequencies.
Paid the fees.
Like that. Ow. That kind of hurts. And you can actually hear using this little delta thing, like what is being taken off. It's like, it's the resonant, like annoying frequencies, you know, it's the bite in the vocal, and we don't need that, so. Good piece of advice for this, what I usually do is I kind of just like put it on the default setting, and then let me see if I can just show you real quick. So if I just go to default preset, literally you just throw this on. Obviously it's doing a lot right now, but what you want to do is you kind of want to like adjust, see where it's kind of like ducking out the most. It's pretty much there, you know what I mean? And then, you know, maybe a little bit it's doing there. So when you boost these, it actually, that's the part that's being suppressed. It's kind of like the opposite of an EQ. It's like ducking down the parts that you boost. And then just play with the depth, basically. I don't want to go too far into sharpness or selectivity. It's kind of, you know, kind of explains itself. But like, mainly I mess with the bands, and then I mess with the depth. You don't want to take out too much, because when you take out too much, it just doesn't sound good. It sounds like you zapped it, you know? So I usually just bring down the depth, and then yeah, that's kind of how I'd have it. Then next I'll add another stage of compression. So I'm huge on stacking compressors because it gives me just a really nice and like evened out vocal sound. Gave the keys, shut it all down and arrange a speech. Here's to getting gas too fast with no brakes. Yeah, just a little bit of drive on there. Just to fill out the mid-range a little bit. You paid, sworn into a mission built on dumb luck. Then I had a Pultec on. Literally just adding a little bit of 8K on there. The best way to figure out like, so this is a part of like, you know, the additive EQ stuff. Like, so a big part of like what I do is I, you know, I have this whole acronym that is the order in which I do things, and which is called like CRISP. So it's like a crispy vocal, get it? So first we cut the S's and some of the annoying frequencies out. So that's de-essing and subtractive EQ. That's the C in CRISP, cut. Then after that, we reduce it. We do some gain reduction, usually with a compressor or two, doing like, you know, anywhere from like 5 to 7 on the first one, and then like maybe a little bit more with the second one, maybe more, really depends. So that's cut and then reduce for gain reduction. Then after that, I do ironing out, and the ironing out in this case is we're kind of like look at it like kind of like a wrinkled shirt. So like we have these mid-rangey frequencies that are kind of annoying, and we also have these bitey frequencies. So this kind of takes the place of dynamic EQ in this case, in which, you know, if someone didn't have Soothe, I'd say use dynamic EQ, but then so I is where like ironing it out with some of this stuff.
Throw her in the trash and hatch the next play.
And then the next thing that we do is we're doing some saucing. So what I do when I say sauce is like additive EQ. So in this case, what I like to do is I kind of boost this a lot and then see what frequency makes the most sense for me to boost. And in this case, like the 8K just adds a little bit of presence to it. So let's just kind of switch between them.
Shut it all down and arrange a speech. Here's to getting gas too fast with no brakes. Throw her in the trash and hatch the next play. Corporate craze, get the fuck away. More to life than the lunch you paid. Sworn into a mission built on dumb luck. No
yeah, they all give me something like a little bit of a different flavor, but I find that like 8K is good just for the presence and kind of like the intelligibility of the vocal and being able to hear the consonants and the words that are being said. So that's the position that I'm having the Pultec play, is like having it add some presence to the vocal. Then after that, I add another EQ, just, again, like kind of ironing it out, going back to that. But we're just doing some more subtractive EQ. I'm also boosting some of the mid-range just to give it a little more body. And then here's where the thing, like I go in and I really just like, really just go in there and take down all these annoying frequencies. A lot of these things, like what you want to do is you kind of want to listen for where a frequency is annoying some of the time, but not 100% of the time. And then you hear it and you're like, okay, that's kind of an annoying frequency, but I'm only hearing it on certain syllables. And then we add a band there. We say like, okay, for example, like here. If it's annoying 100% of the time across every word, every syllable, you would duck it down. But if it's annoying sometimes, then what you could do is you could do this, just make it dynamic. And that way it's only lowering it when it's a problem. So that's kind of the philosophy behind when you would use dynamic EQ versus regular EQ, And then after that, sometimes when you add top end onto your vocal with the saucing aspect, you know what I mean? With adding like an additive EQ in the top end, you'll end up having a DS after the fact. So that's kind of the point of this de-esser here.
No breaks, throw her in the trash and hatch the next play.
Add another EQ. We're gonna skip this. More EQ. This whole frequency range can go to hell, honestly. More soothe. Apparently I wasn't getting it. And then after that, here's a big thing. Here's a really important thing that I do is I actually have isotope trash on here, adding some distortion to the overall vocal. Honestly, just adding some more grit to it. So like hearing it in the context of like just by itself, it's like you're kind of adding a lot of distortion. Like, why would you do that? And the thing is, like, it adds more distortion, but it also kind of like tucks it in a little bit, because distortion is kind of the same thing as compression in a lot of ways, where it kind of like will kind of make the vocal, I mean, I do have built-in compression happening here, which is helping, but it's going to help the vocal have more character to it, and the distortion is going to help it cut through in the mix a little bit more. So hear it in the mix without the distortion. Now hear it with the distortion. It has like a little bit of like a top end grit to it, which is really helping. So that's why, like, that's why you don't necessarily always want to mix your vocal in solo. You want to mix it in the context of the mix, because in the context of the mix, the vocal cuts through a little bit more with that distortion. So next, I think I just added another EQ. I just go to town on these dynamic EQs. Honestly, like I don't know if I'm like a fraud or not, but like this is what I do. Sorry. Next, all right, so I obviously have some effects on here, which I'll go into later. But okay, so one thing that I do on my vocal buses is I add OTT. OTT is a multiband compressor, but when you bring it up just a little bit, literally like 6% in this case, it just glues the vocals in together nicely. It also glues the effects and the vocals together. I have a bus that's all the vocals, all the harmonies, and all the effects together. So OTT helps glue that stuff together really nicely. So here's without it. And then here's with it. Just tucks it in just a little bit. Too much, it's gonna sound so weird, but like even just 6% is fine. And then we got just a little bit of bus compression. I normally don't put bus compression on the vocal, but in this case it really worked. Again, with vocal compression in any level, fast attack and fast release is the way most of the time. So that's what I recommend. Then after that, so here's one thing that I do that not a lot of people do, but I actually limit my vocals. I had a limiter on my vocals, and the reason for this is because it really tucks the vocal into the mix and just helps you later on down the line. A lot of times you'll get to mastering and you'll realize that your vocal is not very like even or level, and you'll have to go in and like go back to your, the vocal will poke out sometimes, and you'll have to go back and like compress your vocal more or do something else. So it's really helpful to add a limiter onto your vocals at the end. And then I have the attack not too fast, because it was kind of killing the transients when I had it too fast. But literally just doing a little bit of limiting on the vocal. And here's without it. And then here's with it.
throw her in the trash and hash the next play.
Like, you can see that it's doing like even up to like 5 decibels of gain reduction, and the thing is, like, this is something that you probably like wouldn't want to do, but in this case, like, it makes the vocal just super consistent, super across the board. You see, like, this is like the 5th like compressy thing that I'm putting on the vocal chain, but it's just the vocal is sitting on top of the mix so nicely now, and the transients aren't being murdered, they're not being massacred by all the compression because I don't have the attack times too fast on these, you know what I mean? So it's still cutting through despite the fact. And obviously you have to gain match, like you can see, like it went like +8 here, so I had to make the out like minus whatever here. But yeah, super helpful to just, you know, add a limiter onto your vocal bus, you know, at the very end. You wouldn't think that, but it's super helpful, especially when you have a lot of layers. Yeah, and then I have another more mid-range apparently. Yeah. And then one last EQ. Yeah, probably to get rid of some of that like extra leftover sibilance. Yeah, that's it for the vocal chain. So aside from that, I actually have some effects here. So what I'll do is I'll just show you. Mainly I want to talk about the delay actually. Like the reverb is just a reverb. I think I just used, what did I use for the reverb on here? I use Maniverb. Yeah, so I use Maniverb. Honestly, like I shoot out these reverbs. I spend a lot of time shooting out these reverbs, and a lot of times, like for my vocals, I normally don't put a plate on vocals, but in my vocal, the plate really did the trick. So let's just listen to it real quick. So when you're checking out your reverbs, you really want to be shooting out different reverbs on every vocal unless you're really comfortable. Like, you know what's going to work on what. But in my case, like, man, I'll pick a different thing every time sometimes. Like, so what I do is I go in and I basically just like, you know, turn it up louder than it's actually going to be in the mix. So this is at like -12.5. So I'll turn it up to like -3 or whatever. And I'll be like, okay, which one works the best? We got Hall. Hall's a little dense, a little too dense. Chamber's not bad. Honestly, these are all pretty good, but I liked the plate. The plate on my voice usually sounds pretty good. Usually I go with Halls, but the Hall was sounding a little cluttered on my vocals, so I'll bring it up louder than it needs to be, and then I'll kind of like, in the context of the mix, I'll dial it in. You don't want to set your reverbs in solo. That's the biggest waste of time next to mixing your kick drum in solo. So like what you do is you just bring it down a little bit in the mix while everything is playing. Yeah, and that's it. So next, the delay. So with the delay, basically what you want to do is same thing, kind of like, you know, well, delay is not the same actually, but one thing that I do on the delay here that's actually pretty dope is I actually added a ton of distortion to it before it even hit the delay, as in I distorted the crap out of the vocal before the delay and then activated the delay. So when you hear it,
built on dumb luck, no one's due to listen till you come. Yeah, paid the fees, gave the keys, shut it all down and arrange a speech. Here's to getting gas too fast with no brakes.
One thing that I do, and a lot of you guys know this if you follow me, is I add a compressor after the delay, sidechain the vocal to the compressor, and then the vocal basically, like, you know, makes the delay duck down through the use of sidechain compression. And then basically all you do is you route it to the compressor. You see that it's, you know, in every dot's different, but here I have to switch the compression thing on and, you know, make sure that you're routing to that compressor in your send. And, you know, it's ducking down the delay while the vocal is present, which keeps it out of the way. But here's without that, for example. It's a lot louder. So let me see if I can just solo this, actually. That's what it sounds like. So here's before I'm even hitting the delay. So I'm literally just distorting the crap out of it with Decapitator. I'm ruining it. Punish on E on 8. And then delay, but it's a filtered delay. So that's what it sounds like. That's what the delay sounds like. And then you use the use of this compression and it gets it out of the way while the vocal is present. So it's tucked back into the mix, but it's there, and it's a very, very distorted, very aggressive delay, and it really contributes to the character of the mix overall, because the delay is very distorted and gross and amazing sounding. So yeah, Cool. So I want to talk about the outro chorus. So a lot of people might be wondering like how I got the outro chorus mix to sound so clean, and a lot of it really comes down to mixing your vocals lower than you think they should be. So a lot of times when we're mixing vocals, we end up doing like a lot to try to like, bring one up and bring another down. And really the key with mixing these dense arrangements is to mix things lower in the mix than you think they should be. You can lose perspective really easily when you have a lot of tracks. So what I do is I just mix things kind of lower than they should be. And then when you hear it, especially after mastering, it's super loud. So let me just play it just so you can hear it.
Yeah, turn the chaos into cash. Throw a right hooks till the episode back guy. I'm never not exhausted, but I won't waste my time. Yeah, turn the chaos into cash. Bury our losses with the other setback side. I'm nervous, I'm nervous.
So yeah, as you can see, there's so many vocals happening, so many vocals. And a lot of that comes down to the limiter on the vocals. So that's the thing, like when I have all those vocal layers, I mix them lower than they should be, and then I throw a limiter on at the end. So obviously I have the valid point vocals in addition to my own. Here's what they all sound like just soloed out.
But I've come too far, can't digress. Yeah, turn the chaos into cash. Throw a right hooks till the episode back guy.
So here's the deal with panning. Like, all right, so you don't need to like fan your vocals out like evenly, like 10%, 10%, 10%. Because when you're working with like 15 vocals, you might think that you have to like do this shit where you like pan them out and make them all spread out. You do not need to do that. So I usually do this. I have like, my main vocal in the center, or if I have like two main vocals, I'll have them like, like 10%, 10%. And then you'll have your doubles panned 100% left, 100% right. I'm going to say it again. 100% left and 100% right for anything that's doubled, anything at all that's doubled. 100% left and 100% right. And then any harmonies, I will do like 35% or like 50%, something like that. Anything that's like a low harmony, anywhere between like 20% to like 50%. Anything that's a harmony, that's what I'll do. It's like this, kind of, maybe even like this, you know what I mean? So I hope this is making sense, but I'll just show you. Like, look at how I have my panning kind of structured out. Couple hook highs. I mean, the hook highs are like 40%, it looks like. Then doubles, boom. 100% left, 100% right. 100% left, 100% right. And then these are ad-libs. I'm not going to count those. Harmonies, 50%, 50%. More harmony, 20%. And then anything that's like an octave up or an octave down, like, if you had like a falsetto, for example, and it's only like one falsetto, you'd have that just in the center. If you had like one low harmony or like one low octave, you'd have that in the center. But you don't need to like overthink your panning. It's just, leveling. Obviously, you want to level like, your low vocals lower, and you want to just level your harmonies. Typically, what I've found is you want to mix your harmonies lower than you think you do. And that's the harmony is not, the point of a harmony is not to be heard. It's to add a texture and to harmonize. So, just think about that for a second before you actually mix it, and you'll realize your harmony should be a little bit more tucked in the mix. So that's my approach to it. So real quick, I want to talk about my all vocal chain for valid points. So basically what I do here is I have his whole vocal chain, and then I have some things at the end of the vocal chain that kind of add a little bit, some unconventional stuff that's pretty weird that I added. But like, for example, so I have the limiter on here. Aside from that, another EQ, and then another EQ to add more warmth to his vocal. And then sometimes, a lot of times, so here's the deal, like when you have so many vocals happening, you're gonna have to de-ess just a little bit extra. Like if you have like 15 vocal layers, what do you think is gonna happen? Your S's are gonna stack on top of each other, and it's gonna be super sibilant. So I actually enabled it just in the chorus, just when all his vocals are happening, just a little bit of some multi-band compression on just the top end on his voice. So I'm just compressing that just a little bit there. And then this is a weird thing that I did, but I did it. I just increased the sides by 5.5 on wave center. And then I felt like, so here's the caveat to like, L2 or whatever on the vocals. I did feel like it was kind of like causing his vocals to not cut through as much. So I actually put a transient shaper on the vocal at the end there. And I just added smack attack and just literally just increased the attack of his vocals by like 0.6 by 6, and it just cut through just a little bit more. So here's without that. And then here's with it. I feel like I could hear like the consonants a little bit more, like the cash and like all that stuff. So that's the thing. Like when you're doing the limiter on the vocal thing, just be careful. And like if like worst case, you can like undo a little bit of what you did by like putting a transient shaper. I don't know. Like I don't like, you know, maybe that's not how you mix, but like there's no rules. So I just do weird shit like this and it works. And sue me. So yeah, that's it. And then Sue is just like, you know, last line of defense for more S's, more Sig 1 stuff. Okay, last thing I want to talk about with the vocals, because I know I've been talking about vocals for like ever, is that I actually automate a lot of these effects. So I think that one thing that's very important to keep in mind when you're doing vocal stuff is that, especially if you're working with these dense arrangements with a lot of stuff, your stuff is not going to be consistent across the board. Your effects are not going to be consistent. You're going to be adding like delays in and out. Like I think one of the examples is like I wanted a specific delay on the yeah, and I wanted a different delay on the rest of the vocals. So what I have is like, I mean, just check it out. Like I'll show it to you right now. Like I have a delay that's turned on just for the yeah, and then it turns off like, you know, for the rest of it. Check it out. So it's a little bit of like an extended delay. Like it's like, yeah. You know what I mean? And then the rest of it is like a little bit of a more tucked in delay. And that's why the yeah at the beginning there is just, it just drags out just for a little bit longer. You know what I mean? So that's the thing. Like it's just automating your effects, man. It's so underrated. It adds so much dynamics to your mix. And like, again, like if you look at like my effects that I throw on my ad libs, even like this right here is money. Like listen to this. I'm nervous. I'm literally automating, and I'm not going to go into this now because I did it in my production video, but I automate the formant shifter like up and down on this guy, you know what I mean? And I'm automating the panning. I'm doing all kinds of shit with like filtering and all that stuff and just automating. And you know, one other thing to keep in mind is like your vocal, if your arrangement is exciting and it has like all this stuff, like your vocal is not going to be the same volume from section to section. Like if you look at my, like, you know, even this, like the valid point mains, like I have his verse is doing all this shit because it's like, you know. I never really thought didn't find my who would have thought didn't be the unknown. Running in the dark with my hands out front, praying out loud, I don't mess it. You know what I mean? Like I had to bring up the part where it's just him and then tuck it back when it's the rest of the vocals. So yeah, man, automation is just huge. So a couple other points I want to make about this mix. So the first thing being that like I do have a kick and snare sidechain on basically like the rest of the instruments so that the kick and snare are actually ducking that stuff down. So for example, on the guitars, I basically just have neutron compressor and it's being enabled by the kick and the snare. So it's obviously like, you know, the guitar is being ducked by like 10 decibels on the kick and then it's being ducked like 5 decibels on the snare. Some people think like just sidechain your kick and it's fine, but it really helps a little bit if you sidechain the snare as well, even though people might not think that's something that you should do. Creates just a little bit more space for the snare. And then another thing, so I'm just going to break down the 808 real quick. So the 808 is definitely like, you know, crucial. One thing that I do is I just add distortion to it. So here's the 808 by itself, and then I added a little bit of Manny distortion to it. One thing that I do though that, you know, I've talked about a lot at this point is that I have it sending to a wide 808 bus, which is basically just like so here's that, cut out the lows, add R bass to juice up this sort of mid bass frequency a little bit. And then after that, Manny distortion, just driving it, kind of a lot actually. Then after that, EQing out all the low frequencies, EQing out some resonances, and EQing out a little bit more. And then the trick is to reverse the phase on one side. So here's without the reverse. And then you reverse the phase on one side, pretty little like top end, you know, thing on top of your 808. So that's how I get the distorted 808 sound. So one thing that really helps your drums stand out and just have a little bit more of a cohesive sound is bus compression. So one thing that I do is have bus compression with an attack time of like 10, fast release time. That way, like, you know, the drums come forward in the mix a little bit more. We talked about how fast release times do that. And it leaves the attack intact because I have it at like, you know, 10 milliseconds or so here. So listen to the drums without the bus compression. Now I'm gonna throw it on. The kick is a little bit more dialed in. Here's without. Yeah, it kind of brings the kick a little bit, tucks the kick in a little bit more, but it also maintains the attack a little bit. So yeah, that's bus compression. So I want to talk about frequency masking for a second. So frequency masking is something that you want to take into account pretty much every single mix that you do. A lot of people think, like, you know, especially if you're working with a 2-track, that you just sidechain, like, you know, the vocals to like track spacer on like the whole beat. That's not what you want to do, because your drums and your vocals don't necessarily conflict. Like your 808 and your vocals might, but your drums and your vocals not necessarily. So what you want to do is you want to put one of these 3 tools on top of whatever instruments are clashing with your vocals. So in this case, let's talk about the guitars for a second. So the guitars and the vocals, they occupy a lot of the same frequency range, especially like in that kind of lower mid area. So you want to make sure that you're kind of like addressing these issues. And there's 3 ways to do this. So there might be more, but anyway, there are a couple plugins that I use. So let's just let me bypass what I have here, and then I'll show you what I do. So the first way that you do this is you would basically grab a fab filter, an EQ, or something that has like you could do this with literally just an EQ, and you basically just grab it, put it on whatever has all the guitars running through it, and basically what you want to do is you kind of just want to search through using that EQ to see where they're conflicting a little bit, you know? So I feel like right here, the mid-range from the guitars is conflicting with the vocals, so I'll probably bring it down. So you can bring it down. That's the first thing you do. Just you know, sweep through, snipe where they're conflicting, bring it down a little bit. Or what you could do, the other thing you could do is you could use a dynamic EQ that has sidechain capabilities, make it dynamic, and that way it'll duck it down a little bit just when the vocal is present. And for this, you're gonna have to actually sidechain the vocal to this to make it work. So let's see. Yeah, so you see. So you just make sure that it's sidechaining to it, and it'll basically duck that stuff down just when the vocal is present. So another thing that you could do is you could use a plugin that's like specifically for this. So in this case, it is Track Spacer. So Track Spacer is a plugin that you basically just sidechain to it, and then it makes space in the actual like sound for that vocal. So in this case, like you could see it'll duck down. You really only need a little bit with this. Because if you do too much, it's just gonna make the guitar disappear a little bit. Yeah, so that's another thing that you could do. And then the last thing that you could do is you could use a plugin like Soothe. I mean, you could use multiband compression for this as well. So I think that, you know, I know I said 3 things. I think the first one is just EQ. The second one is dynamic EQ. And the third one is like, you know, using plugins specifically for this. So, you know, one of them being Soothe. Like you could sidechain to Soothe using this little sidechain button. So you have the vocal going to Soothe on the all guitars and bass bus. Basically, that'll cause the frequencies to be lowered down when it hears the vocal. Same thing as with dynamic EQ, and same thing as with Track Spacer. Yeah, so this is what that's going to look like. Obviously, you don't want to overdo it, or it's gonna kill too many frequencies. I think Soothe is probably the cleanest way to do it because it seems like it's, you know, you can really adjust like how many frequencies it's sucking down. And, you know, you can really adjust like how specific you want it to be and how much you want it to duck down the frequencies. So I think that's probably my method of choice, but there are a few options for you to use. So anyone will probably do the trick. So one more thing that I do is I do top-down mixing on this song specifically. So, you know, there's mastering and then there's like, you know, mix bus processing. So I think this is definitely considered, you know, part of like mix bus processing specifically. So what I do is I have like, you know, stuff already on my master bus that I'm mixing into. Like one of them is a bus compressor, same exact setting as the drums, but it basically just like glues the mix together, especially with the drums in relation to the rest of the things in the mix. Then I also mix it into this that has a little bit of like a top end boost at 16K. Just to give it a little bit of juice on the top end to begin with. And I also always run my masters through a Pultec anyway. And then I do a little bit of EQing here. I'm cutting out all the lows from the sides just to tighten up that, you know, that bass. Cutting out a little bit of this because I felt like the mix overall just needed less of that. I just don't need that. And then I added a little bit here just to help with like the presence of the mix and to help the vocal cut through a little bit more. One thing that I do when I'm EQing my mix overall is I'll add these little like boosts just to like, you know, add a little bit of enhancement to the mix overall and give the vocal a little bit more, like it gives the vocal the floor a little bit more in the context of the whole mix. Then I added standard clip on. So standard clip is a dope plugin. Basically what it does is it just like it clips the top of the waveform and just gives it a little bit of a, you know, it's clips it. So it adds some harmonics while also like giving it some distortion, giving it some punch, and also making it so that it doesn't, you know, peak too loud. So here's with it. Here's what happens if I drive it too much. That soft clip, like, that's clipping it a lot. So you obviously don't want that. But a little bit is nice. I kind of just drive this until I see that it's just clipping. You can see there, it's clipping the kick drum just a little bit. Yes, it works great on kick drums. I even throw this on like just the kick drums. I've thrown it on hi-hats. It's great for just adding some saturation on top of things. And then I am also running my entire mix through this Kramer tape plugin because I know that I love this and I know it's going to add a nice like sound, especially what it does to the top end. So here's without it. And then here's with it. Yeah, I found that it kind of like juices up the top end and adds some clarity. Every tape plugin is different. You really got to like play with tape plugins to see what you like. But I mean, really, it just comes down to like figuring out what tape plugin sounds good and then adjusting, you know, it's essentially just the in and output on here. Yeah, so that's it. Now I'm going to move over to the mastering side of things. All right, so we've made it over to the mastering side of things, and I have not actually walked through mastering of my own songs yet. So basically, the first thing that I have here is I have a dynamic EQ. So one thing that I've discovered about mastering in general is that like when you master and you slam something through a limiter, a lot of these annoying frequencies will get juiced up. So here's just what it sounds like mastered, and I'm going to walk through the chain as well, but here's what it sounds like just in general. So one frequency range that I brought down with the dynamic EQ is this one. So again, like with the mid-range has to be consistent for the song to sound, you know, not muddy. So a lot of times, you know, if you do Ozone Mastering Assistant, you'll see it automatically pull these little frequencies down for you. And a lot of it is because like when you slam it through a limiter, it's going to get juiced up, and a lot of these frequencies are going to sound muddy and just get overly enhanced. So that's one thing, is dynamic EQing helps with that. A little bit more here and there. You know, some of that stuff's a little crispy, so I'm bringing it down. And then one other thing that I do, let me actually loop a section. When I master a song, I always stick to the section that has the most going on. So one thing that I do that I don't normally do is I have Soothe on here, and it's just evening out. Like with Soothe on the master, you really have to be careful. Like you can easily overdo it. So I just have it just smoothing out some of this extra. You can kind of hear what's being taken out. And then with Ozone, what I do is I'll have a little bit more, because what I do sometimes is I look at tonal balance control and I look at like what it looks like overall, and it told me I needed a little bit more mid-range. So here's without the EQ. Yeah, so as you can see, like my mix is kind of top heavy. So like, you know, I'll add an EQ to it, and then the EQ will give it just a little bit more. And you don't really want to overdo it. You want to take this with a grain of salt, because it'll tell you that your mix is super lacking in one area, and then you'll go fix it and you're like, well, now my mix sounds bad. So like, just be careful with this. Don't overdo it. It will tell you when something's out of the pocket, and that's when you want to definitely like address some stuff. But I don't take it too seriously. Then again, dynamic EQing here, just taking down some of this stuff. Some of this. It's like kind of like boxy kind of frequencies. Some kind of telephonic, just nasally frequencies. And then there's a lot of crispiness in this mix, I'm not gonna lie. So taking down the AK dynamically a little bit. One thing that I love is this low end focus section in Isotope Ozone, because it really kind of like, it adds some punch to it. I was like, I need more punch out of my kick and my bass and all that low end. So this just adds a little bit more, like you can hear it. Like I'll solo it for a second. So you can hear when I drag this down, it's adding a little bit of punch, but it's not too much. And then you can increase this to add, you know, more punch to it and make it like, yeah, the reason why I wanted to add this low end focus is because it adds a little bit of separation between the kick and the 808. So that's why I liked it in this case. Adding another EQ for some more mid-range. Taking down some of this a little bit. And then here's what I do. I talked about this before in some of my other content, but what I do is I have two limiters on here. So typically when I master, I try to hit like, you know, peaks of like minus 0.5 to like minus, there's no real like right answer, but here's where I'm peaking on this guy. You know, I try not to peak above like minus 0.5. Sometimes it goes a little bit over and it's not really that serious. And then you can see my integrated loudness, I try to be like minus like 7, minus whatever. But I mean, you got to be careful, because like you can easily just make it sound bad if you're driving it too much. Like watch what happens when I drive it too much. It distorts. No one wants that, you know what I mean? So I kind of try to take it easy. And one way to do this is to actually add a vintage limiter on before the maximizer. That way, like you're not, as opposed to like driving this one super hard. I get better results when I do a little bit with a vintage limiter. And then just drive this one a little bit less. You know what I mean? You can still hit that loudness, but it's the same thing as like stacking compressors. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's the double, the famous double limiter trick that I do, you know. And then yeah. So that is it as far as like, you know, the whole mix, the whole master, everything. One thing you'll notice is that I use my headphones for like the majority of this mix. There's no right answer, like should you mix on speakers or headphones? Some people say like speakers are better. I think that's, you know, that's one way to look at it. I think they're both great. If I had the option, I'd probably be mixing on speakers in a perfectly treated room, but as you can see, my room is not treated right now, so the headphones do the trick. One thing I will say is like, I use SonarWorks reference thing to get my, you know, to make sure that it's that what I'm hearing is accurate and flat. And then another thing is that, I do have decent headphones. So make sure you're working with headphones that are, at least like, I'd say like in the $300 price range. It depends on the headphones, obviously. And just make sure that you are familiar with them, you know them, you listen to as many mixes as you can on them before you do that. So that is it. Hope you learned something new. Let me know what you would like to see more of, what, made sense to you, maybe something didn't make sense to you. And of course, what you thought about the song. It's out, so you can go check that out. I'll put the link below. And thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I'll see you soon.